The cold water of the Missouri River rushed against Katherine Sawyer's ankles as she waded deeper, her sodden skirts growing heavier with each step. The letter clutched in her trembling hand was smeared with tears, the ink running in rivulets like the shattered pieces of her life. 1878 had already taken everything from her husband, her baby, her family home. And now, as autumn winds whipped across the Dakota Territory, Katherine had decided it would take her too. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over the rushing water and her own strangled sobs. The river beckoned, promising an end to the gnawing emptiness that had hollowed her chest since the fever took little Emma 3 weeks ago. Her husband Thomas had been gone 6 months by then, shot dead by rustlers while defending their small herd of cattle. "Madam, hold fast there." The deep voice cut through her grief-clouded mind just as the water reached her waist. "Whatever you're thinking, it ain't worth it," Katherine turned, startled by the intrusion. A tall figure astride a chestnut gelding had dismounted at the riverbank, his weathered face set in grim determination beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "Leave me be," she called back, her voice breaking. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he answered, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair. "I know that river's got a current that'll drag you under before you change your mind." He began wading in after her, boots and all. "That's what I want," Katherine whispered, though the approaching stranger couldn't hear her. He moved with surprising speed through the water. "Name's Matthew Galloway, madam. Most folks call me Matt, and I ain't in the habit of watching folks drown when I can do something about it." Before Katherine could retreat deeper, his strong hand caught her arm. The touch, the first human contact she'd felt since the preacher's condolences at Emma's burial, sent a shock through her system. She hadn't realized how desperately she'd craved the warmth of another person. "Let go of me," she said, trying to wrench away, but her strength had been sapped by weeks of grief and poor eating. "You have no right." "No, I don't," Matt agreed, his hazel eyes fixed on hers. "But I got a responsibility, one human to another." Something in his steady gaze made Katherine falter. Not pity, she'd seen enough of that in town to recognize it, but understanding. As if he knew something about the darkness she was wading into. "My baby," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "My husband, they're gone." "Everything's gone," Matt nodded slowly. "I figured it was something like that." His grip gentled but didn't release. "The river won't bring them back, madam. It'll just add your name to the list of those lost." A fresh wave of sobs overtook Katherine. The letter, her sister's response declining to take her in back east, floated from her fingers and was carried away by the current. She watched it go, feeling the last thread of hope disappear with it. "Come on now," Matt urged quietly. "Let's get you to shore before you catch your death." The irony of his words wasn't lost on her, but Katherine found herself allowing this stranger to guide her back toward the bank. Her legs were numb from the cold water, and she stumbled more than once. Each time, his steady hand kept her upright. On solid ground, the reality of what she'd nearly done crashed over her. Katherine's knees buckled, and Matt caught her before she fell. "Easy there," he murmured, helping her to sit on a sun-warmed boulder. He removed his duster and draped it around her shoulders. The weight and warmth of it seemed to anchor her to the earth in a way nothing had since the losses began. "Why are you here?" she asked. Teeth chattering as delayed shock set in, Matt crouched before her, keeping a respectful distance now that they were on shore. "Was tracking a stray calf." "Heard crying." He glanced at the river, recognized the look of someone with nothing left to lose. Katherine studied him properly for the first time. He wasn't young, perhaps mid-30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into harsh sunlight and weather. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner direct but not unkind. "You should have minded your own business," she said, though there was less conviction in her voice now. "Probably," he agreed with a slight nod. "But my ma raised me better than that." He reached for a canteen at his hip. "Here. Drink something that ain't river water." Katherine accepted it mechanically and took a small sip. The water was cool and clean, nothing like the silty river that had promised oblivion minutes ago. "You got somewhere to go, madam?" Matt asked after a moment. The question reopened the wound. "No." She handed back his canteen. My place was foreclosed. I was staying at the boarding house in Millerville, but my funds." She trailed off, embarrassed by her destitution. Matt nodded as if this was information he'd expected. I work for the Rocking D about 8 miles east. Owner's widow, Mrs. Daniels might have use for help around the main house, at least until you figure things out. Katherine stiffened. I don't need charity, Mr. Galloway. It ain't charity if you work for it, he countered. And it's just Matt. Mrs. Daniels pays fair and there's a cabin you could use. Private-like? Katherine stared at the churning water that had almost claimed her. What did she have to lose by accepting? If the situation proved unbearable, the river would still be there. Why would you help me? She asked, suspicious of kindness after months of misfortune. Matt was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. 3 years ago, I was standing where you were. Different river, same idea. He tapped his left leg, and Katherine noticed for the first time a slight stiffness in his movements. Lost my leg below the knee in the war. Lost my wife to consumption after. Someone pulled me back then, figured I owed the same to someone else. His honesty disarmed her. Katherine had expected platitudes, not this raw confession of shared darkness. I'm Katherine Sawyer, she finally said, offering her name like a peace treaty. Pleased to meet you properly, Mrs. Sawyer, Matt replied with a nod, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Katherine, she corrected. Or Kate. The nickname felt foreign on her tongue. Thomas had always used her full name, saying it was too beautiful to shorten. Kate, Matt repeated, standing and extending a hand to help her up. My horse can carry us both to the Rocking D if you're willing. Katherine looked at his outstretched hand. The impulse to refuse was strong, to insist she didn't need saving. But hadn't she just tried to surrender everything to the river? Accepting help required more courage than giving up. She placed her trembling hand in his calloused one. I suppose I am. The ride to the Rocking D was largely silent, with Katherine perched awkwardly in front of Matt on his patient gelding. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the warmth of another human being at her back lulled her into a state of exhausted calm. She hadn't realized how completely fatigue had consumed her until she felt herself drifting, her head nodding forward. It's all right, Matt's voice rumbled behind her. I won't let you fall. Those simple words brought fresh tears to her eyes. She'd been falling for months with no one to catch her. The Rocking D came into view as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was larger than Katherine had expected, a substantial 2-story main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse off to the side. Cattle dotted the surrounding grasslands, more numerous than any herd Thomas had managed to accumulate. Mrs. Daniels runs all this, Katherine asked, finding her voice again. Matt nodded. Going on 5 years now since Mr. Daniels passed. Most folks thought she'd sell up and move back east, but she's made a go of it. Tough as saddle leather, but fair. He guided the horse toward the main house, where a gray-haired woman in a practical dress was supervising the unloading of supplies from a wagon. She turned at their approach, one hand shading her eyes against the setting sun. Galloway, did you find that wayward calf? She called. No, madam, Matt answered, dismounting and then helping Katherine down. Found something else that needed tending to, Mrs. Daniels assessed Katherine with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing: the damp clothing, the redness around her eyes, the way she clutched Matt's duster around her shoulders like armor. I see, was all she said. Bring her inside. Looks like she could use some hot food and dry clothes. Katherine found herself shepherded into a warm kitchen where a pot of stew bubbled on the stove. Matt explained the situation in low tones to Mrs. Daniels while Katherine stared at her hands, shame coloring her cheeks. She expected judgment or pity, but received neither. Life's hard out here, Mrs. Daniels said simply, placing a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread before Katherine. Especially for a woman alone. Eat now, we'll talk after. Katherine ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered what it was to want sustenance. Matt excused himself to tend to his horse and check in with the ranch hands, leaving her alone with the older woman. Matt says you might have use for help, Katherine ventured when her bowl was empty. Mrs. Daniels nodded. I lost my housekeeper last month. Married one of the hands and moved to Oregon. She studied Katherine carefully. You know your way around a kitchen. Can you keep accounts? Yes, madam, I ran our household and helped my husband with the books for our small operation. Good. I need someone who can manage the house and assist with correspondence. I never had much schooling, and these Eastern cattle buyers expect proper letters. Catherine felt a flutter of something like purpose. I was a school teacher before I married. I could help with that. Then it seems you're the answer to a problem I've been having, Mrs. Daniels said with a decisive nod. There's a cabin behind the main house. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. Wage is room and board plus $15 a month. Fair, it was more than fair, and they both knew it. Catherine nodded, afraid to speak lest she betray the emotion closing her throat. From the brink of self-destruction to employment and shelter in the span of hours, it seemed unreal. Matt will show you to the cabin. Rest tonight, you can start tomorrow. Mrs. Daniels rose, then paused. Whatever drove you to that river today, it won't disappear overnight, but work helps. Gives your hands something to do while your heart mends. With that unexpectedly gentle wisdom, she left Catherine to finish her tea. Minutes later, Matt returned, carrying a bundle of clothing. Mrs. Daniels sent these, said they belonged to her daughter who visited last summer. Might be a bit large, but they're dry. Thank you. Catherine accepted the bundle. For everything, Matt shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Just doing what needed doing, ready to see your cabin. The small structure was indeed clean and private, set back from the main house near a stand of cottonwoods. It was sparsely furnished: a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a chest of drawers, but after weeks at the crowded boarding house, it felt like a palace to Catherine. It's not much, Matt said, lighting the lamp on the table, but it's sturdy, won't leak when it rains. It's perfect, Catherine replied honestly. She hesitated, then added, I don't know how to thank you properly for today. Matt stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. No thanks needed. He paused, searching for words. Just give yourself time, that's all. After he left, Catherine changed into the borrowed clothing and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in weeks, she was alone but not lonely. The difference was subtle but profound. Outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional call of a night bird. Sounds of life continuing, regardless of individual sorrows. She lay down, expecting sleep to elude her as it had so many nights since the losses began. Instead, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, pulling her into the first dreamless rest she'd had in months. Morning came with soft light filtering through curtainless windows and the sound of activity from the main house. Catherine rose, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day rushed back. She had nearly ended her life. A stranger had stopped her, and now she was here, given an unexpected second chance. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, a simple skirt and shirtwaist that hung loosely on her grief-thinned frame, and made her way to the main house. The kitchen was already busy, with a young woman of perhaps 16 stirring a massive pot of porridge while Mrs. Daniels issued instructions to what appeared to be a ranch hand. Ah, there you are, Mrs. Daniels said, noticing Catherine. This is Lucy, helps with the cooking. Lucy, this is Mrs. Sawyer. She'll be managing the household now. Lucy offered a shy smile. Morning, madam. Please call me Catherine, she responded, uncomfortable with formality from someone not much younger than she had been when she'd married Thomas at 19. Mrs. Daniels gave a brisk tour of the house, larger than it appeared from outside, with 6 bedrooms upstairs, a formal dining room, sitting room, study, and the large kitchen with its attached pantry. Throughout, she outlined Catherine's duties, managing the household staff, Lucy and a young man named Jacob who handled the heavy work, planning meals, overseeing supplies, and assisting with correspondence. The men take their meals in the bunkhouse except Sundays and special occasions, Mrs. Daniels explained. Foreman and his wife have their own cabin. It's just me in the main house since Mr. Daniels passed and our son moved to Denver. By mid-morning, Catherine found herself at a desk in the study, sorting through a pile of correspondence. The familiar task was soothing, giving her mind something to focus on besides her grief. When Lucy brought her coffee, Catherine realized she had worked straight through for 3 hours without once thinking of the river. The days fell into a pattern. Catherine rose early, prepared breakfast with Lucy, then spent mornings managing household affairs and afternoons assisting Mrs. Daniels with business correspondence. The physical and mental activity left her too exhausted most evenings to do more than eat supper and fall into bed. It was, as Mrs. Daniels had promised, a way for her hands to stay busy while her heart began the slow work of mending. She saw Matt occasionally. He would ride out with the other hands at dawn and return at dusk, sometimes stopping by the kitchen for coffee if she happened to be there. Their interactions were brief but cordial. He never mentioned the river, never asked how she was faring, but his eyes would search her face as if assessing whether she was still standing on solid ground. A week passed, then two. The nightmares that had plagued Katherine since Emma's death gradually became less frequent. She still woke some mornings with tears on her cheeks, but the crushing weight on her chest had lightened enough to allow her to breathe without conscious effort. One evening in late October, Katherine sat on the small porch of her cabin, wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill. The sunset painted the sky in spectacular hues of gold and crimson, a beauty she was slowly relearning how to appreciate. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Matt stood at the edge of her porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Kate. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please join me." He settled his tall frame into the chair, placing his hat on one knee. "You're looking better," he observed after a moment. "Got some color back in your cheeks." Katherine nodded. "I'm sleeping more, eating regularly." She paused. "Thank you for asking. Mrs. Daniels says you're a godsend with the books and letters. Says you write like one of them fancy Eastern ladies." A small smile touched Katherine's lips. "Hardly, but I did have good schooling before I came west." "What brought you out here?" Matt asked, the question gentle but direct. Katherine considered deflecting, but found herself wanting to answer honestly. "Thomas, my husband, had dreams of building something of his own. He'd worked his uncle's farm in Pennsylvania since he was a boy but never owned anything. When the Homestead Act opened up land here, he saw his chance." She stared at the fading sunset. "I was 19 and in love. I would have followed him anywhere." Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how it is sometimes. One person's dream becomes two people's journey." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly. "Though I don't think either of us realized how hard it would be. The winters, the drought 2 years ago, the rustlers." She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss resurging. "And then the fever that took your little one," Matt added quietly. "Mrs. Daniels mentioned it." Katherine tensed, then forced herself to relax. Of course people talked. A woman at the river's edge made for compelling gossip. "Yes, Emma was only 3. She swallowed hard. "I keep thinking I should have done more. Ridden for the doctor sooner, kept her cooler somehow." "Fever's a merciless thing," Matt said. "My Sarah was sick for months. Nothing the doctors tried made any difference." His voice held the rough edge of old grief. "You can drive yourself mad thinking about what you might have done differently." The shared understanding in his words loosened something in Katherine's chest. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, the question she'd been afraid to voice aloud. Matt was silent for a long moment. "Not entirely," he finally said, "but it changes. Becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you." His description resonated with a precision that startled her. "That's exactly it. At first, the grief was all there was. I couldn't see past it, couldn't breathe through it. And now?" Katherine considered the question carefully. "Now, there are moments when I forget to feel it, brief ones. Then the guilt follows, as if I'm betraying them by not hurting every second." Matt nodded. "Know that feeling well." He glanced at her. "The guilt's a liar, though. Your husband, your little girl, they wouldn't want you drowning in sorrow forever." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll forget them if I don't hold on to the pain." "You won't," Matt assured her. "The good memories come back once the pain eases a bit." Sarah's laugh. The way she'd sing while hanging laundry. A small smile touched his lips at the recollection. Katherine found herself sharing in return. "Emma had these little curls that wouldn't stay pinned up no matter what I did." And Thomas would spend evenings whittling toys for her, his hands so big around those delicate pieces of wood. They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Katherine realized with a start that this was the first time she'd spoken of Thomas and Emma with something other than raw agony. The memories still hurt, but there was also a sweetness to them she hadn't been able to access before. "I should let you get some rest," Matt said eventually. Rising from his chair, Katherine stood as well. "Thank you for the company and the conversation." He settled his hat back on his head. "Anytime, Kate. Sometimes talking helps sort things out." As she watched him walk back toward the bunkhouse, Katherine felt a curious lightness. Not happiness, she wasn't ready for that yet, but perhaps the first fragile stirrings of peace. November brought colder temperatures and preparations for winter. Katherine threw herself into the work, learning the rhythms of ranch life with growing confidence. Mrs. Daniels proved to be a fair employer with high standards but genuine appreciation for competence. The older woman rarely spoke of personal matters, but Katherine gradually pieced together her story through comments and observations. Widowed young, no formal education but a natural head for business, determined to preserve the ranch her husband had built for their son, who showed little interest in returning to manage it. One morning, Katherine was inventorying the pantry for winter supplies when Mrs. Daniels appeared in the doorway. "Need to send someone to Millerville for supplies," she announced. "Matt's heading in with the wagon. Could use another pair of hands, and you know what the house needs better than I do." Katherine hesitated. She hadn't been back to town since the day at the river. The prospect of facing people who might have witnessed her desperate departure was daunting. Mrs. Daniels seemed to read her thoughts. "Been meaning to get you some proper clothes, too. Can't have you wearing Beth's hand-me-downs all winter." The kindness behind the practical statement decided her. "I'll go," Katherine agreed. "I've made a complete list of what we need." An hour later, she found herself seated beside Matt on the wagon bench, a heavy coat borrowed from Mrs. Daniels protecting her from the November wind. Matt handled the team with quiet competence, his gloved hands steady on the reins. First time back to town. He asked after they'd been traveling for a while. Katherine nodded. "I'm a bit nervous," she admitted. "People talk in small towns." "That they do," Matt agreed. "But most folks are too wrapped up in their own troubles to dwell long on others, and those that do gossip ain't worth fretting over." His matter-of-fact assessment eased her anxiety somewhat. They continued in comfortable silence until the outskirts of Millerville came into view. The small prairie town looked much as Katherine remembered: a single main street lined with wooden buildings, the steeple of the church visible at the far end. "Where to first?" Matt asked as they approached the general store. "The mercantile for household supplies," Katherine decided. "Then I need to visit the dressmaker if there's time." Matt nodded. "I'll handle the feed and hardware while you see to the household goods. Meet back here in an hour." The familiar routine of selecting supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, dry goods that would sustain the ranch through winter storms, steadied Katherine's nerves. Mr. Peterson, the storekeeper, greeted her with no more than a polite nod, treating her as he would any other customer. She was examining bolts of flannel when a woman's voice called her name. Katherine turned to find Margaret Wilson, the banker's wife, approaching with a sympathetic expression that immediately set her teeth on edge. "Katherine Sawyer, I declare. We've all been so worried about you since you left town so suddenly." Margaret's eyes were alight with barely concealed curiosity. "After everything you've been through, to disappear without a word." Katherine forced a polite smile. "I found employment at the Rocking D. Mrs. Daniels needed household help. The Rocking D, my goodness, that's quite fortunate, though I suppose any situation would be an improvement after your tragic circumstances." Margaret lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I told Herbert that's my husband. I said to him, that poor Sawyer woman has endured more than anyone should bear. First your husband, then your precious child, and then losing the homestead to the bank." Each word felt like a knife twisting in Katherine's chest, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, it was a difficult time. If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Wilson, I need to complete my purchases. Mrs. Daniels is expecting me back before dark." Of course," Margaret fluttered, clearly disappointed at being deprived of further details. "Do give my regards to Mrs. Daniels." Such a strong woman, carrying on after Mr. Daniels passed. Though some say it's not proper, a woman running a business that sighs without remarrying. Mrs. Daniels manages quite capably, Katherine replied, a new edge in her voice. Good day, Mrs. Wilson. She completed her purchases quickly and arranged for them to be brought to the wagon. The encounter with Margaret had left her shaken, the woman's words reopening wounds that had just begun to heal. By the time she reached the dressmaker's shop, Katherine's hands were trembling slightly. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who had married the town's only tailor, greeted Katherine with a warm smile. Mrs. Sawyer, welcome. You need new dresses, Katherine nodded, grateful for the straightforward question. Yes, please. 2 everyday dresses and perhaps one for Sundays. Nothing elaborate. The dressmaker's gentle efficiency was soothing after Margaret Wilson's probing questions. Within half an hour, Katherine had been measured, had selected practical fabrics, and had arranged for the completed garments to be sent to the ranch the following week. She emerged from the shop feeling steadier, only to stop short at the sight across the street. Matt stood outside the saloon, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with a tall, well-dressed man. Even from a distance, Katherine could see the rigid set of Matt's shoulders and the tight line of his jaw. Before she could decide whether to approach or wait by the wagon, the confrontation ended. The well-dressed man stalked away, and Matt turned, catching sight of Katherine. His expression cleared immediately, though she could still detect tension in his movements as he crossed the street to join her. Everything all right? She asked. Fine, Matt answered shortly, then seemed to check himself. Sorry, just an old disagreement with the bank manager. Nothing for you to worry about. He gestured to the packages in her arms. Need help with those? Katherine allowed the subject change, sensing he preferred not to discuss whatever had transpired. These can go in the wagon. I've arranged for the larger orders to be delivered shortly. They worked together to load her purchases, then Matt helped her up onto the wagon seat. As he climbed up beside her, Katherine noticed for the first time a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there during the journey into town. We could stop for lunch at the hotel dining room before heading back, she suggested, wanting to delay their return to the ranch long enough for him to regain his usual calm demeanor. Matt glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. You sure? Thought you might be eager to leave town after seeing folks again. Katherine smiled ruefully. I had a rather uncomfortable encounter with Margaret Wilson, but otherwise it wasn't as bad as I feared, and I find I'm quite hungry after all the shopping. Something in Matt's face softened. Hotel food's decent. Better than my cooking over a campfire anyhow. The hotel dining room was quiet at this hour, with only a few tables occupied. They were seated near a window overlooking the main street, a small vase with dried prairie flowers adorning the table. Katherine removed her gloves and smoothed her borrowed skirt, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. You look fine, Matt said quietly, accurately reading her thoughts. Better than fine. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you. Though I'll be glad when my new dresses arrive next week. Their meal arrived beef stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert, and conversation flowed more easily than Katherine had anticipated. Matt told stories of his early days on the Rocking D, and Katherine found herself sharing memories of her teaching days before marriage. Why did you stop teaching after you married? Matt asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Katherine considered the question. It wasn't really a choice. The school board only hired unmarried women. The assumption was that a married woman would be too busy with her own household to devote proper attention to her pupils. She smiled wryly. And once we moved out to the homestead, the nearest school was 15 miles away. Do you miss it? Teaching. Sometimes, she admitted. There's something wonderful about watching a child's face when they finally understand something they've been struggling with. That moment of illumination. Her voice softened. I had planned to teach Emma at home until she was old enough to attend school in town. Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. You'd have been a good teacher for her. The simple statement, offered without pity, eased rather than aggravated the pain of her loss. Thank you for saying that. As they finished their meal, Katherine noticed the bank manager who had confronted Matt earlier entering the dining room. Matt's back was to the door, but she saw his shoulders tense when the man's voice carried across the room as he greeted another diner. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. Matt's jaw tightened. Lawrence Blackwell runs the bank now, used to be friends with his father, but the son's cut from different cloth. He kept his voice low. Been pressuring some of the smaller ranchers to sell out, trying to piece together a bigger operation to sell to Eastern investors. Katherine felt a chill. "Is that what happened to our homestead? After Thomas died, the bank foreclosed so quickly I hardly had time to pack our belongings." Matt's expression darkened. "Wouldn't surprise me. Blackwell's been using any excuse to call in loans. Drought, late payments, even rumors of rustling activity to claim the land isn't secure." "Could he do the same to the Rocking D?" Katherine asked, concerned. "Mrs. Daniels owns her land outright." Blackwell's tried other tactics, offering to buy portions, suggesting she's too old to manage it all, but she won't budge. The conversation faded as they became aware of Blackwell approaching their table. The banker was perhaps 40, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed Katherine with uncomfortable thoroughness before turning to Matt. "Galloway," he acknowledged with a nod that managed to be both polite and dismissive. "Surprised to see you dining in town rather than at the Chuck Wagon." "Mr. Blackwell," Matt replied evenly. "Just picking up supplies for the ranch." Blackwell's attention shifted to Katherine. "Mrs. Sawyer, isn't it? I was sorry to hear about your recent losses, a tragedy, especially for one so young." His sympathy sounded rehearsed, his eyes calculating rather than compassionate. "Thank you," Katherine replied stiffly. "I understand you've found employment at the Rocking D," Blackwell continued. "A fortunate arrangement given your circumstances." Matt's expression hardened. "Mrs. Sawyer has been a valuable addition to the ranch. Mrs. Daniels considers herself lucky to have found someone so capable." Blackwell smiled thinly. "Indeed. Well, I won't interrupt your meal further. Good day to you both." He moved away, stopping at another table to speak with what appeared to be a business associate. "I don't like that man," Katherine said quietly once Blackwell was out of earshot. "Good instinct," Matt replied. "He's been causing trouble all over the county." He glanced out the window. "We should head back, weather's looking changeable." The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in thought as the wagon rumbled over the rutted road. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising an early winter storm. "Matt," Katherine ventured after several miles of silence. "What did Blackwell want when he confronted you outside the saloon?" Matt's hands tightened on the reins. "Information. About Mrs. Daniels' plans for the ranch, whether she'd mentioned selling any parcels." "Why would he think you'd tell him such things?" A muscle worked in Matt's jaw. "We have history. He thinks he can leverage it." At Katherine's questioning look, he elaborated reluctantly. "After Sarah died, I went on a bender. Ended up owing money to his saloon. He paid off my debt in exchange for work, but I left before completing the agreed time." His expression was grim. "He considers that I still owe him." "Does Mrs. Daniels know about this?" Matt nodded. "Told her when she hired me. She said a man's past is his own business as long as it stays past." He glanced at Katherine. "I've been sober 3 years now, since the day someone pulled me back from that river." The parallel to her own rescue wasn't lost on Katherine. "Is that why you were so determined to help me? Because someone did the same for you?" "Partly," Matt admitted, "but mostly because—" He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Because I recognized something in you." A fight not quite gone out. Katherine considered this. She hadn't felt like someone with any fight left that day by the river, yet here she was, months later, still standing, still breathing, still finding small reasons to continue. "I'm glad you saw that," she finally said. "Even when I couldn't see it myself." The first snowflakes began to fall as they approached the Rocking D, fat white flakes that melted upon contact with the ground but promised more to come. By the time they unloaded the supplies and stabled the team, a proper snowfall was underway, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Katherine stood on her cabin porch that evening, watching the snow accumulate in pristine drifts. The day's events replayed in her mind: Margaret Wilson's prying, Blackwell's calculating gaze, Matt's unexpected confession about his past. It struck her that, for the first time in months, Her thoughts were occupied with the present and future rather than dwelling exclusively on her losses. It wasn't that she had forgotten Thomas and Emma. They remained ever present in her heart. But somewhere along the way, without her noticing, she had begun to engage with life again, to care about the people and events around her, to feel something beyond grief. As she watched the falling snow, Katherine realized she was grateful to be alive to witness its quiet beauty. The thought brought tears to her eyes, not the desperate tears of those dark days after Emma's death, but gentler ones acknowledging both loss and continuance. The woman who had waded into the river intending never to return had indeed been swept away. In her place stood someone new, scarred but surviving. The sound of boots crunching through snow made her turn. Matt approached through the gathering dusk, a lantern in one hand casting a warm glow on the surrounding whiteness. "Brought you this," he said, holding up the lantern. "Storm might knock out the power to your cabin if it gets worse." "Thank you," Katherine said, taking it from him. "Would you like to come in for coffee? It's bitterly cold out here." Matt hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks, just for a few minutes." Inside, Katherine busied herself with the coffee pot while Matt removed his hat and coat. The small cabin felt suddenly smaller with his tall frame occupying the space, but not uncomfortably so. There was something reassuring about his solid presence as the wind began to howl outside. "Will the cattle be all right in this weather?" she asked, placing a steaming cup before him. "They'll bunch together for warmth. We moved them to the sheltered pasture yesterday." Matt wrapped his hands around the cup. "Mrs. Daniels has good instincts about incoming weather, better than any barometer I've seen." Katherine smiled. "She's a remarkable woman." "I've learned so much from her in just these few weeks." "She thinks highly of you too," Matt said. "Says you've got a good head on your shoulders and a strong spirit despite everything." The compliment warmed Katherine. "I'm trying to live up to her confidence in me." "You are," Matt assured her. "More than you know." They fell into comfortable silence, sipping their coffee as the storm intensified outside. Katherine found herself studying Matt's profile, the straight line of his nose, the slight furrow between his brows that eased as he relaxed, the way the lamplight caught in his hair, highlighting strands of gold among the brown. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking that I know very little about you, beyond your work at the ranch and what you've told me about your wife." Matt considered this. "Not much else to tell. Born in Missouri, fought with the Union in '65, though I was barely old enough to enlist. Lost part of my leg at Petersburg. Came west after the war, met Sarah in Colorado, married her in '68. His voice softened at the mention of his wife. Worked ranches all over the territory until settling at the Rocking D 5 years ago. What was Sarah like?" Katherine asked, genuinely curious about the woman who had held his heart. A small smile touched Matt's lips. "Stubborn, smart, could play the piano like an angel and curse like a sailor when she thought no one was listening." The fond recollection held bittersweet warmth rather than raw pain. "She was a school teacher too before we married. Had no patience for foolishness but endless patience for children who were truly trying." "She sounds wonderful," Katherine said sincerely. She was. Matt's eyes met hers. "Thomas, what was he like?" The question caught Katherine off guard. Few people asked about Thomas as a person rather than as a tragedy. "Kind," she said after a moment. "Determined. He had this dream of building something lasting, something that would grow beyond him. He could be too serious sometimes, but when he laughed..." She smiled at the memory. "When he laughed, it was like the sun coming out after rain." Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And your little girl took after him, in some ways. She had his coloring and his stubbornness." Katherine's voice grew soft with remembrance. "But she had my love of books. Even at 3, she would sit for hours if I read to her." "It helps, doesn't it?" Matt asked quietly. "Talking about them, keeping them alive in memory." "It does," Katherine agreed, surprised to find it true, "though it took me a long time to be able to speak of them without falling apart." "That's how healing works," Matt said. "Not all at once, but in pieces small enough to bear." The simple wisdom of his words resonated deeply with Katherine. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the cabin was warm, secure, a sanctuary against both physical and emotional cold. I should get back to the bunkhouse, Matt said eventually, rising from his chair. Storm's not letting up. You could stay, Katherine found herself saying, then flushed as she realized how the offer might be interpreted. I mean the sofa. It would be dangerous to walk back in this. Matt hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. I appreciate the offer, but the men would talk, not about you, he added quickly. About me taking advantage of your kindness, Katherine understood. On a ranch, reputation was everything. Of course, I wasn't thinking clearly. It was thoughtful, Matt assured her, donning his coat and hat. And tempting to avoid trudging through that blizzard, but I've weathered worse. He paused at the door. Lock up behind me. After he left, Katherine stood at the window watching his lantern's glow fade into the swirling snow. The conversation had left her feeling strangely content, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lightened. There was something healing in sharing memories of Thomas and Emma with someone who truly listened, who understood loss without being consumed by it. For the first time since that day at the river, Katherine found herself contemplating not just survival, but the possibility of a future that might hold more than mere endurance. Winter settled over the rocking D with a heavy hand, transforming daily routines into challenges of endurance and ingenuity. Katherine's duties expanded to include tasks normally handled by the now snowbound Jacob carrying firewood, breaking ice on water troughs near the house, helping Lucy care for the chickens that huddled miserably in their coop. Despite the hardships, Katherine found unexpected pleasure in the rhythm of winter life. The enforced closeness of the household created a sense of camaraderie. Evenings were spent by the fire, with Mrs. Daniels teaching her and Lucy to knit while recounting tales of the early days of the territory. On Sundays, weather permitting, they gathered in the main house for a communal dinner with the ranch hands, a tradition Mrs. Daniels maintained from her husband's time. Matt was a quiet but consistent presence in Katherine's life. Their friendship developed gradually through shared tasks and conversations snatched during the business of ranch life. She found herself looking forward to his visits to the main house, to the way his eyes would seek her out across a room, to the small smile that seemed reserved just for her. December brought Christmas preparations and a brief thaw that allowed a trip into Millerville for supplies and holiday provisions. Katherine, now more comfortable in town, selected small gifts for everyone at the ranch: handkerchiefs for the men, hair ribbons for Lucy, a fine shawl for Mrs. Daniels. For Matt, after much deliberation, she chose a leather-bound journal, remembering how he sometimes sketched idle patterns in the dust while talking. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The main house was transformed with greenery and candles, the scent of pine mixing with the aroma of roasting meat and baking pies. Katherine moved through the preparations with a bittersweet awareness her first Christmas without Thomas and Emma, yet surrounded by people who had become, in their way, a kind of family. After the festive dinner, as ranch hands drifted back to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Daniels retired to her room, Katherine found herself alone in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. The sound of the door opening made her turn to find Matt, his arms full of split logs for the kitchen stove. Thought you might need these for morning, he said, depositing them in the woodbox. Temperatures dropping fast out there. Thank you, Katherine replied, drying her hands on her apron. It was a lovely evening, wasn't it? Matt nodded, remaining by the stove as if reluctant to leave the warmth of the kitchen, or perhaps, she thought with a flutter of something like hope, reluctant to leave her company. I have something for you, she said impulsively. A Christmas gift, wait here. She hurried to the pantry where she had hidden the wrapped presents, returning with the journal. It isn't much, but I noticed you sometimes draw when you're thinking. Matt accepted the package with obvious surprise. You didn't need to get me anything, Kate. I wanted to, she said simply. He unwrapped the journal carefully, running his fingers over the soft leather cover. This is fine work, thank you. He looked up with a smile that reached his eyes. I have something for you too, but it's at my quarters. Could I bring it by your cabin tomorrow? Of course, Katherine agreed, warmth spreading through her at the thought that he had considered her worthy of a gift. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the kitchen quiet save for the crackling of the stove fire. Katherine was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way the lamplight cast shadows across Matt's features, softening them. "I should let you get some rest," Matt finally said, though he made no move to leave. "It's been a long day." "Yes," Katherine agreed, equally motionless. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension not unpleasant but charged with possibility. Matt's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. The back door banged open, shattering the moment. Lucy bustled in, cheeks red from the cold. "Oh. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just forgot my mittens." The girl retrieved her mittens from a peg by the door, darting a curious glance between Katherine and Matt before disappearing back into the night. The interrupted moment hung between them, neither quite able to recapture it. "Merry Christmas, Kate," Matt finally said softly. "Merry Christmas, Matt," she replied. After he left, Katherine finished her tasks and made her way back to her cabin through the crystalline night. Stars blazed overhead with fierce brilliance, the snow crunching beneath her boots the only sound in the profound silence of deep winter. Inside her cabin, Katherine lit the lamp and built up the fire in her small stove. As warmth gradually filled the space, she sat on the edge of her bed, mind replaying the almost moment in the kitchen. Had Matt been about to kiss her? More importantly, had she wanted him to? The answer came with surprising clarity: yes. The realization should have brought guilt. It had been only 6 months since Thomas's death, 9 since Emma's, but instead, she felt a quiet certainty. Thomas would not have wanted her to spend her life alone, drowning in grief. He had always been practical that way, concerned with her welfare above all else. Sleep came easily that night, and for the first time in months, Katherine dreamed not of loss but of possibility. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Katherine woke early, kindled her fire, and prepared for the day. Church services in town were impossible given the snow-choked roads, so Mrs. Daniels had arranged for a small observance in the main house. As Katherine dressed in her best new gown, a deep green wool that Mrs. Chen had finished just in time for the holiday, a knock sounded at her door. Matt stood on her porch, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Merry Christmas," he greeted, a small package in his gloved hands. "Thought I'd bring this by before the day gets busy." Katherine invited him in, suddenly self-conscious about her hair still loose around her shoulders rather than properly pinned up. "I was just about to head to the main house. Would you like coffee first?" "No need," Matt said, though he made no move to leave. His eyes lingered on her hair before quickly averting. "You look nice. That color suits you." Katherine felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. Mrs. Chen did beautiful work." Matt handed her the package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "It's nothing fancy," he cautioned as she began to unwrap it. Inside was a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Katherine ran her fingers over the delicate work, recognizing the prairie blooms that grew around the ranch in summer. "Did you make this?" she asked, amazed by the craftsmanship. Matt nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Whittling passes the time during winter evenings. The design those were Sarah's favorite flowers. I thought you might like something similar to keep small mementos in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Katherine deeply. That he would share something so personal, connected to his wife's memory, spoke volumes about how far they'd both come in their grief journeys. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you, Matt." Their eyes met and held. This time, there was no interruption as Matt slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. The brief contact was warm and startlingly intimate, leaving a lingering sensation on her skin as he stepped back. "We should head to the house," he said quietly. "Mrs. Daniels will be waiting." The Christmas service was simple but heartfelt, with Mrs. Daniels reading passages from her well-worn Bible while ranch hands shuffled respectfully in their Sunday best. Throughout, Katherine was hyper-aware of Matt seated across the room, his occasional glances meeting hers with a new warmth that both thrilled and unsettled her. The day passed in a blur of food, conversation, and small celebrations. By evening, when Katherine returned to her cabin after helping with the cleanup, she felt both exhausted and strangely energized. Matt's gift sat on her small table, already containing the few precious items she had salvaged from her former life: Emma's tiny silver baptismal cross, Thomas's wedding ring, a pressed flower from their homestead garden. January brought renewed storms and the isolation that accompanied them. For days at a time, the ranch was cut off from town, dependent on its own resources and preparations. Katherine found herself grateful for the full storerooms and Mrs. Daniels' foresight in stocking medicines, candles, and other essentials. The enforced proximity created a strange intimacy among the ranch's inhabitants. Katherine came to know the rhythms of each person's day, their habits and preferences. Matt, she noticed, was always first up, breaking trails through the snow for others to follow. He took the most dangerous tasks upon himself without complaint, checking distant cattle, repairing wind-damaged outbuildings, ensuring the safety of all. One particularly bitter afternoon, as Katherine was returning to her cabin after delivering fresh bread to the bunkhouse, she spotted Matt struggling through the snow with what appeared to be an injured calf slung across his shoulders. Without hesitation, she rushed to the barn ahead of him, throwing open the doors and clearing space in an empty stall. "What happened?" she asked as he gently deposited the trembling animal on fresh straw. "Found her half buried in a snowdrift," Matt explained, breathing heavily from the exertion. "Mother's nowhere in sight, probably lost in the last blizzard." Katherine immediately set to work, rubbing the calf with handfuls of straw to stimulate circulation, while Matt prepared a bottle of warm milk from the ranch's dairy cow. Together, they coaxed the reluctant animal to drink, their hands occasionally brushing in the process. "She needs a name," Katherine said when the calf finally began to show signs of recovery. Matt looked up, amusement warming his eyes. "Planning to make a pet of her?" "Perhaps," Katherine admitted. "She's a fighter. Reminds me of someone else who survived against the odds." His expression softened with understanding. "What would you call her then?" Katherine considered the small black calf with its white starred forehead. "Hope," she decided. "Her name is Hope." Matt's smile reached his eyes. Fitting. They remained in the warm barn longer than necessary, talking of inconsequential things while the calf dozed between them. Katherine found herself relaxing in Matt's company in a way she hadn't with anyone since Thomas's death. There was no need to pretend or perform. Matt had seen her at her absolute worst and still looked at her with respect and growing affection. "Kate," he said during a lull in conversation, his tone turning serious. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Katherine's heart quickened. "Yes." "That day by the river." He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "What drove you to that point? You don't have to answer," he added quickly. I want to understand, to make sure I never say or do anything that brings back those feelings for you." The question was unexpected but asked with such genuine concern that Katherine found herself answering honestly. "It wasn't one thing. It was everything, piled one atop another until I couldn't see any way forward. Thomas dying, then Emma, then losing the homestead." She traced patterns in the straw with one finger. "But mostly it was the isolation. Grief is heavy enough to carry when you have someone to share the burden. Alone, it felt impossible." Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "After Sarah, I felt the same. Like I was drowning on dry land and everyone around me was breathing just fine." "Exactly," Katherine said, relief flooding her at being so completely understood. "And then that letter came from my sister, refusing to take me in. It was the last thread of hope I had." "Your sister," Matt repeated, a furrow appearing between his brows. "You never mentioned her before," Katherine sighed. "Rebecca and we were never close. She married well to a banker in Boston. When I wrote asking for help, her response made it clear I would be an embarrassment to her social standing, a widowed sister with no prospects." The memory still stung, though less sharply than it once had. "That was the letter I was holding when you found me in the river." Matt's expression darkened. Family should stand by each other through hardship. "Not all families are like that," Katherine said softly. "Rebecca and I were raised with different expectations. She fulfilled hers by making an advantageous marriage. I disappointed our parents by marrying a farmer with dreams of the West. Do you regret it?" Coming west with Thomas, Katherine considered the question carefully. "No, she finally said. "Despite everything, the hardships, the losses, I don't regret our time together. Thomas gave me freedom I never had in Pennsylvania, and Emma." Her voice caught briefly. Those 3 years with Emma were worth a lifetime of security in Boston. Matt reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the straw. The contact was warm and steadying. "You're the strongest person I know, Kate, to have endured all that and still be standing." "I wouldn't be standing without your help," she reminded him, his fingers tightened slightly around hers. "You were already fighting, I just offered a hand up." The calf stirred between them, breaking the moment. Matt withdrew his hand and rose to his feet. "I should check on the other animals before dark." Katherine stood as well, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. "And I should get back to the house. Mrs. Daniels will wonder where I've disappeared to." They parted at the barn door, Matt heading toward the cattle shed while Katherine made her way back to the main house through the gathering dusk. The memory of his hand covering hers stayed with her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. That night in her cabin, Katherine stood before her small mirror and studied her reflection properly for the first time in months. The face that looked back at her was different from the one she remembered, thinner, with shadows beneath the eyes, but also stronger somehow. More resolute. The grief was still there, visible in the set of her mouth and the wariness in her gaze, but it no longer defined her entirely. She was still young, she realized with a start, not yet 25, with potentially decades of life ahead. The thought, which would have been unbearable in those dark days after Emma's death, now carried a cautious hope. There might yet be happiness for her, not the same happiness she had known with Thomas and Emma, but something new. Different, but no less valuable. As January gave way to February, Katherine found herself watching for Matt's presence with increasing awareness. Their interactions, while still proper and often brief, carried an undercurrent of growing connection. Sometimes she would look up from her work to find his eyes on her, a question in them that neither of them was quite ready to voice. Mrs. Daniels, sharp-eyed despite her age, clearly noticed the developing attachment. One evening, as Katherine helped her with accounts in the study, the older woman broached the subject with characteristic directness. "Matthew's a good man," she said without preamble. "Loyal, hardworking. Been through his share of troubles but came out stronger for it." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, he is." Mrs. Daniels studied her over the rims of her spectacles. "Life's short on the frontier, Katherine, shorter for women alone. No shame in finding comfort where it's offered, especially when it comes with respect." "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Mrs. Daniels," Katherine replied carefully. The older woman's expression softened. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, child. Just saying that grief doesn't demand a lifetime of solitude as payment. Your husband sounds like he was a practical man. Would he want you spending the rest of your days alone?" The question was one Katherine had asked herself increasingly often. "No," she admitted. "Thomas would want me to be safe, to find happiness if I could." Mrs. Daniels nodded, satisfied. "Matt looks at you the way my Henry used to look at me, like you're water in the desert." She returned her attention to the ledger before them. "Just something to consider." The conversation left Katherine thoughtful. Until now, her growing feelings for Matt had seemed like a private matter, almost a secret kept even from herself. To have them acknowledged so openly was both unsettling and strangely liberating. February brought the first hints of spring, not in the landscape, still firmly in winter's grip, but in the lengthening days and occasional warm breeze that promised eventual thaw. With the improved weather came increased activity at the ranch as preparations began for the spring calving season. One clear morning, Matt appeared at the main house with an unexpected proposal. "Road to town's finally clear," he announced over breakfast. "Thought I might take the sleigh in for mail and supplies. Wondered if you'd like to come along, Kate." Katherine glanced at Mrs. Daniels, who nodded her approval. "We could use fresh provisions," and Katherine's earned a day away from the house. The sleigh ride to town was exhilarating. Bundled in blankets beside Matt, Katherine found herself laughing as they skimmed over the snow-covered landscape, the horses' bells jingling merrily in the crisp air. It felt like freedom after weeks of confinement, the vast white prairie stretching endlessly around them under a flawless blue sky. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it can be," she admitted as they paused on a rise overlooking the valley where Millerville nestled. "When I first came west, I thought the prairies were empty compared to Pennsylvania's forests, but there's a different kind of beauty here." "Takes time to see it," Matt agreed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Most folks who don't last out here never stay long enough to understand the land. And those who do stay," Katherine asked, Matt's eyes met hers, "can't imagine living anywhere else." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken meaning. Then Matt clicked to the horse, and they continued toward town. Millerville was busier than Katherine had seen it since summer, the streets filled with ranchers and farmers taking advantage of the clear weather to resupply. At the general store, they separated Matt to collect mail and order feed, Katherine to select household supplies. She was examining bolts of fabric when a now familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Sawyer, what a pleasant surprise." Katherine turned to find Lawrence Blackwell approaching, his manner as smooth and calculated as she remembered. "Mr. Blackwell," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "You're looking well," he observed, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her want to wrap her coat more tightly around herself. "The rocking D must agree with you." "It does," Katherine replied simply. "If you'll excuse me, I have several errands to complete." Blackwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Actually, I was hoping for a moment of your time, a business matter that might interest you." Katherine's wariness increased. "What sort of business matter?" "I recently acquired the deed to your former homestead," Blackwell said, watching her reaction closely. "The bank foreclosure, you understand, standard procedure." The news sent a jolt through Katherine. The homestead where she and Thomas had built their life, where Emma had been born and raised, where both were now buried in the hands of this calculating man. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm considering selling the property," Blackwell continued. "But before doing so, I thought you might want the opportunity to reclaim certain personal items. Family graves, for instance, might hold sentimental value." The cruelty of the implied threat that he might sell the land without allowing her access to Thomas's and Emma's final resting places took her breath away. "That's despicable, Mr. Blackwell. Merely practical," he countered smoothly. "Business and sentiment rarely mix well. However, I'm prepared to be generous. Perhaps we could discuss the matter over dinner." "The hotel dining room at 7, Katherine's shock gave way to anger. "I have no interest in dining with you, Mr. Blackwell. If you have business to discuss, you can do so here and now. Is there a problem?" Matt's voice came from behind her, his tone deceptively calm. Blackwell's expression tightened momentarily before smoothing into practiced affability. "No problem at all, Galloway. Just catching up with Mrs. Sawyer. Old acquaintances, you understand. Kate." Matt directed the question to her, ignoring Blackwell entirely. Katherine met his concerned gaze. "Mr. Blackwell was just informing me that he's acquired the deed to my former homestead, and implying that my access to my family's graves might depend on my social cooperation." Matt's face hardened, a dangerous light entering his eyes. "Is that right?" Blackwell straightened, clearly recognizing the shift in atmosphere. "You misunderstand, Mrs. Sawyer. I merely thought, as a courtesy, to inform you of the property's status before it changes hands again." "A courtesy would be providing written assurance of perpetual access to the family cemetery," Katherine replied, finding strength in Matt's solid presence beside her. "Without conditions or expectations." Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. I'll have my clerk draw up the appropriate documents." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you both." After he departed, Katherine released a shaky breath. "That man is a snake," Matt finished for her. "Always has been." He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You handled him well, Kate." "He caught me off guard," she admitted. The thought of someone else owning that land where Thomas and Emma are buried, Matt's expression softened with understanding. "We'll make sure you have legal right to visit them, no matter who owns the property. I promise you that." The "we" in his statement warmed Katherine more than she could express. It had been so long since she'd had someone standing beside her, facing problems as a united front, rather than struggling alone. They completed their errands quickly after that, eager to leave town before encountering Blackwell again. The return journey was quieter, both lost in thought as the sleigh glided over the snow. "Matt," Katherine ventured eventually, "how did you survive it, after Sarah died?" When it felt like nothing would ever be right again. Matt was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "One day at a time," he finally said. "Some days, 1 hour at a time, focusing on work helped giving my hands something to do while my mind and heart caught up." He glanced at her. "And eventually, I started to remember the good times without feeling like I was being torn apart inside." His description resonated deeply with Catherine's own experience. "I'm starting to have days like that, where I can think of Thomas's laugh or Emma's smile without collapsing under the weight of missing them." "That's healing," Matt said simply. "Not forgetting never that, but learning to carry the memories differently." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the only sound the rhythmic jingle of the horse's harness and the hiss of runners over snow. As the rocking D came into view in the distance, Matt spoke again. "Kate, there's something I need to say." His voice was quiet but determined. "I care for you. More than as a friend. I know it might be too soon or unwelcome, but it's not unwelcome," Katherine interrupted softly, her heart pounding. "Not at all." Matt's eyes searched hers, hope and caution warring in his expression. "I don't want to rush you or dishonor what you had with Thomas." "Thomas would want me to be happy," Katherine said with quiet certainty. "To live fully, not just survive." She took a deep breath. "I care for you too, Matt. I wasn't looking for anything except escape that day by the river, but here we are." Matt's hand found hers beneath the blankets, his fingers warm even through their gloves. "Here we are," he agreed. No more was said on the journey home, but something had shifted between them. A door opened, a possibility acknowledged. As Matt helped Katherine down from the sleigh at the main house, their eyes met with new understanding and tentative joy. Spring came to the Dakota Territory with dramatic swiftness, as if the land were impatient to shed its winter mantle. The snow retreated, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Creeks swollen with meltwater rushed toward the Missouri, and the air filled with the calls of returning birds. With the changing season came shifting rhythms at the ranch. The hands were busy from dawn to dusk with spring calving, fence mending, and 1,000 other tasks neglected during winter's grip. Katherine found her duties expanding to include gardening misses. Daniels had maintained a substantial kitchen garden for years and was eager to pass her knowledge to younger hands. Her relationship with Matt developed slowly, respectfully. Their moments together were often brief: a shared cup of coffee at dawn, a walk along the creek at dusk, conversations snatched in the midst of daily work. Yet each interaction deepened their connection, building a foundation of mutual understanding and growing affection. Word of their attachment inevitably spread through the small ranch community. Katherine caught occasional curious glances from the hands, and Lucy's giggles whenever Matt appeared at the kitchen door. But there was no malice in the attention, only the natural interest of people who had watched them both struggle with loss and now witnessed this unexpected blossoming. One warm evening in late April, Matt invited Katherine for a ride. "There's a place I'd like to show you," he said, his manner unusually hesitant, "if you're not too tired." They rode west from the ranch, following a meandering creek until it opened into a small valley sheltered by cottonwoods. Wildflowers dotted the lush grass, and the setting sun painted the scene in gold and amber hues. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed as they dismounted by the creek. "Found it my first year at the Rocking D," Matt explained, leading her toward a fallen log by the water's edge. "Come here sometimes to think." They sat side by side, watching the water flow past. Katherine was acutely aware of Matt beside her, of the barely perceptible tension in his frame that suggested he had something important to say. "Kate," he began after a moment, "I brought you here because—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Because this place has always represented possibility to me, a fresh start." Katherine turned to face him, her heart quickening at the earnestness in his expression. When I pulled you from that river last fall, I had no idea how much you would come to mean to me, Matt continued. I just knew I couldn't stand by and watch another soul give up when there might be something worth living for ahead. There was, Katherine said softly. You were right about that. Matt took her hand in his. I know it hasn't been long. I know we both carry memories that will always be part of us, but I've come to believe that life can offer second chances if we're brave enough to take them. His eyes held her steadily. I love you, Kate. Not in place of what I felt for Sarah, but alongside it a different love, but no less true. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes, not of grief but of unexpected joy. I love you too, Matt. I wasn't looking for love again, didn't think I deserved it or could bear it, but here it is all the same. The smile that illuminated Matt's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. I had this made in town, he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple silver ring. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, Katherine breathed. Katherine Sawyer, Matt said formally, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a new life together while honoring what came before? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will. As Matt slipped the ring onto her finger, Katherine felt the final pieces of her shattered world begin to realign into a new pattern different from what had been before, but whole in its own way. When he leaned forward to kiss her, it felt like both an ending and a beginning, a threshold crossed from mere survival into living again. The wedding took place on a perfect June day, with the prairie in full bloom around them. Mrs. Daniels had insisted on hosting the ceremony at the Rocking D, turning the ranch yard into a festive space with bunting and flowers. The local preacher officiated, his words about renewal and second chances bringing tears to more eyes than just the bride's. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Denver. In her bouquet, she carried wildflowers like those Matt had carved on the wooden box he'd given her at Christmas, a tangible link to both their pasts and their shared future. The entire community turned out for the celebration, neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Millerville, even the Chens who closed their shop for the day to attend. The absence of Katherine's family was a small shadow on the joyous occasion, but she found herself surrounded by people who had become a different kind of family over the past months. As the sun began to set and the dancing continued in the ranch yard, Matt drew Katherine away from the festivities toward a quiet corner near the corral. Happy, he asked, his arms encircling her waist. More than I thought possible again, she answered honestly, resting her hands on his chest. Though part of me still feels it's almost disloyal to be this happy. Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. I felt the same way at first, like being happy somehow diminished what Sarah and I had. He brushed a strand of hair from Katherine's face. But I've come to believe that honoring those we've lost means living fully, not halfway. Thomas and Emma would want that for you. Sarah would want it for me. Katherine leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence. I still miss them, she confessed. I always will. As you should, Matt replied. They're part of who you are. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Just as Sarah is part of me, but we have room in our hearts for more than one love in a lifetime. From the main yard came the sound of laughter and music, life continuing, evolving, finding new expressions. Katherine looked up at the man who had pulled her from the river both literally and figuratively, giving her a reason to keep breathing when all hope seemed lost. Mrs. Daniels gave us her blessing to build a house on the eastern section of the ranch, Matt said after a moment. Said we'd need our own place, especially if we decide to start a family someday. The possibility of children, something Katherine had forced herself not to think about after Emma's death, now shimmered before her like a mirage becoming solid. Not replacing the daughter she had lost, but offering new life, new love, new hope. I'd like that, she said softly. Not right away, but someday. Matt's smile held all the promise of their shared future. We have time, Kate, all the time we need. As twilight deepened into dusk, they rejoined their guests, hands linked, steps matched. The river that had nearly claimed Katherine's life now flowed peacefully in the distance. A reminder not of despair, but of the unexpected turns life could take, how the current that seemed determined to drag you under could instead carry you toward unimagined shores. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the rolling grasslands of the rocking Dee, turning the prairie to a golden sea that rippled in the warm breeze. From the porch of the sturdy two-story house on the eastern section of the ranch, Katherine Galloway watched her 4-year-old son Thomas chase butterflies through the yard, his delighted laughter carrying on the wind. "Careful, Thomas," she called as he ventured near the garden fence. "Stay where I can see you." "He's fine, Kate," Matt's voice came from behind her as he stepped onto the porch, 2-year-old Sarah cradled in one arm. "Boy needs room to run," Katherine smiled, accepting their daughter from his arms, just like his father. "And stubborn like his mother," Matt added with a grin, wrapping an arm around her waist. The years had been kind to them. After their wedding, Matt had been promoted to foreman of the Rocking Dee when the previous man retired. With Mrs. Daniel's blessing, they had built this house and gradually expanded their responsibilities until they were effectively running the ranch operations, leaving the aging Mrs. Daniels free to enjoy her later years without the burden of daily management. Their family had grown with the birth of Thomas 3 years after their marriage, followed by Sarah 2 years later. Both children were strong and healthy, bringing joy that Katherine had once thought forever beyond her reach. They knew of their namesakes. Of course, Katherine and Matt had made sure that the memories of those who came before were honored and preserved. Twice a year, they made the journey to the small cemetery on Katherine's former homestead, where Thomas Sawyer and little Emmer rested. Despite Blackwell's initial threats, the formal agreement guaranteeing perpetual access had held firm, even after he sold the property to an Eastern cattle company. They would bring flowers, tidy the graves, and Katherine would tell the children stories about the father and sister they would never meet, but who remained part of their family history. Life had not been without challenges. The harsh Dakota winters still tested their endurance. Drought years strained the ranch's resources. The small community had seen its share of tragedies: illness, accidents, the hardships inherent to frontier life. But through it all, Katherine and Matt had faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. "Mrs. Daniels wants us for dinner," Matt said, drawing Katherine back to the present. "Says she has an announcement to make." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Any idea what it's about?" Matt shook his head. "Been mysterious about it all week." "Lucy thinks she might be planning to travel east to visit her son. At her age, that would be quite an undertaking." Katherine adjusted little Sarah on her hip, though if anyone could manage it, she could. They gathered the children and made their way to the main house, following the path that had become so familiar over the years. Thomas ran ahead, eager to see Mrs. Daniels, who had become a grandmother figure to both children, spoiling them with cookies and stories of the early days of the territory. Dinner was a lively affair, with Lucy, now a young woman of 21, assisting in serving while regaling everyone with news from her recent trip to Millerville. Mrs. Daniels presided at the head of the table with her customary dignity, though Katherine noticed she seemed more contemplative than usual. After the meal, when the children were occupied with the wooden toys Matt had carved for them, Mrs. Daniels cleared her throat. "I've been giving a great deal of thought to the future of the Rocking Dee," she began, her gaze moving between Matt and Katherine. "I'm not getting any younger, and my son has made it clear he has no interest in returning to Dakota Territory. His life is in Denver now, with his law practice and grandchildren." Katherine exchanged a concerned glance with Matt. They had both been aware of Mrs. Daniels' advancing age, but the possibility of the ranch changing hands had never been discussed openly. "I've decided," Mrs. Daniels continued, "to make arrangements for the ranch to pass to you both upon my death. A formal transfer of ownership, with the provision that you continue to employ the hands who have been loyal to the Rocking Dee and maintain the charitable fund for widows and orphans that Henry established years ago." The announcement left Katherine and Matt momentarily speechless. The Rocking Dee was one of the largest and most successful operations in the county, representing a legacy and fortune beyond anything they might have imagined. "Mrs. Daniels," Matt finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "we're honored by your trust, but this is an extraordinary gift. The older woman smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. Not a gift, Matthew, an investment in people who have proven their worth. You and Catherine have poured yourselves into this land almost as much as Henry and I did. There's no one I'd rather see carry it forward. Catherine found herself blinking back tears. We'll honor your faith in us, she promised, and ensure the Rocking D remains everything you and Mr. Daniels built it to be. I know you will, child. Mrs. Daniels' expression softened as she watched Thomas and Sarah playing nearby. Those children will grow up knowing the value of hard work and fair dealing, with parents who understand that life's greatest wealth isn't measured in cattle or acreage. Later that evening, as Catherine and Matt walked home with their sleeping children in arms, the full weight of Mrs. Daniels' decision settled around them like a mantle of both privilege and responsibility. Did you ever imagine this? Catherine asked softly as their house came into view, warm lamplight glowing from the windows. That day by the river, did you ever think we'd be here? Matt was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Not specifically this, he admitted, but I saw something in you worth saving, worth fighting for. He shifted Thomas in his arms, the boy's head resting trustingly against his shoulder. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Just when you think the story's over, you turn the page and find there are chapters you never expected. Catherine nodded, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. Grief and loss, yes, but also unexpected joy, second chances, new beginnings. I'm glad you were there that day, she said simply. Glad you didn't let me give up. So am I, Kate, Matt replied, his voice warm with love as he gazed at their home, their sleeping children, the life they had built together from the ashes of separate sorrows. More than I can ever say. As they climbed the porch steps together, Catherine felt the deep contentment of having come full circle. The woman who had waded into the Missouri River intent on ending her life was gone, transformed by time and love and the patient work of healing. In her place stood Katherine Galloway, wife, mother, rancher, survivor. A woman who had learned that even the deepest grief could, with time, make room for joy. The door closed behind them, enclosing their family in warmth and safety as the prairie night deepened around the house they had built together. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, eternal witnesses to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity to begin again, against all odds, when offered a hand reaching through the darkness.